Okay, let's kick off. The last 2 weeks have been about importing. This week, the really good stuff, which is a lot of what your conversations and questions have been about, which is not just how do I bring stuff into Rhino, but how do I actually model stuff inside of this software, or to be honest, any software where 3D modeling is what you're wanting to do. So we are moving to the second of the 3 chunks of this lecture series. Importing is done. So if you've got questions about the mapping task, the process of getting data and getting information into a 3D modeling environment, any of those things, you can grab me for half an hour after this lecture at 11 o'clock in the studio, and you can ask any questions you want, but there won't be any more formal lecturing on the import side of the course. We're going to move on to probably the biggest or the bigger chunk, which is about how you then model in 3D. Because you're designers, you aren't just about bringing maps into something. You are all about actually coming up with new ways of doing architecture and new ways of working. I'm looking here at my Rhino viewport, and what we're going to do this week is we're going to just take one step back from everything I've shown you so far and go from the very basics of this is how Rhino, but also many other 3D software, 3D modeling softwares work to allow you to create geometry in 3D. Those of you who are paying attention over the last little while, the last week I gave you a piece of advice. Do you remember what that piece of advice was? It was to do with scale. What's wrong with this picture? There's no people in it. Excellent, brilliant. So the first thing I might want to do is, I actually have a template, but all I need to do really is go back, a quick reminder, a recap of what we were doing before. You could import things into your scene before you even start. And one of the things that you could import is, by the way, this is cool. These are all the supported files. You can import a PDF file into Rhino if you have one. Where are my people? I think I put them on my desktop. There we go, people. Boom. And something's appeared down here. But the first thing that people tend to struggle with, especially in Rhino, but also 3ds Max, Revit, any 3D modeling software, is how do I navigate around? How do I move things so that I can see what I need to see and make sure that the right things are kind of lined up on the screen? Apologies, give me 2 seconds. Here we go. So the first thing to be aware of is that what you're looking at is a user interface onto a 3D world, and it's going to give you different ways of looking at that 3D data, that 3D geometry, that 3D environment that you're creating. The one view that everyone kind of instantly thinks of as 3D is this one up here in the top right corner. And I think if I do this, no. Yeah, here we go. For some reason, my Zoom thing isn't working. No, Rhino tries to take over. Okay, don't worry. Up in that area there, you will see a world that kind of looks more 3D than the other 3. And that's because it's got a little word next to it saying perspective. This is your perspective view. However, and this is the cool thing about the way that a lot of these programs work, you can decide which views go where. And the way that you can do that is each of these viewports, this is called a viewport, it's a port into your 3D world, has a little arrow next to it. I think I can do this. Yeah, there we go. So you can see a bit better on the screen. Has a little arrow next to it, pointing downwards. And that will allow you to change a lot of things about that viewport. The first thing that you can do is come down to set view, and you can say, let's set that to be a top view. So I click that, and now I have two top views along the top. Now, why would you want that? I don't know, but maybe you prefer, just in your mind, to have a perspective view on the left-hand side rather than the top right. I mean, you can choose where you want those views. Personally, I tend to leave it at the default, but this little arrow and this little set view allows you to change the way that you see the world. So I'm going to leave this one as perspective. And so now what we've got is a top view, a front view, a right view, and a perspective view. And you can think of those as analogous, although not exactly, to your tutors last year in year one. They kept on asking you for three things, didn't they? Plans, sections, elevations. Do you know why they kept asking you for plans, sections, and elevations, and why you sort of were a bit sick of being asked for plans and sections and elevations by the end of the year? Was because if you can draw a plan of something looking down from above, you can draw a section cut through it, and you can draw an elevation from outside it, you've pretty much well explained how that thing is set out in 3D space. And these viewports are kind of constantly giving you a plan, a section, elevation from different angles. So the first thing that you might notice is now that we've imported our people, you're probably going to think, well, I can't see these people that I've imported. And so the next thing that I want maybe to do is to change how these viewports are aligned or zoomed. Basically, think of them as cameras lying in space, and you can move the camera around as if you're directing a little film. And the way we're going to do that is with the mouse wheel. I've got a little display, hopefully this will work, in the top left of my screen. Whenever I make a key press or do something on my mouse, it'll pop up on the screen. So when you're watching this video back, I will just double check the recording is working. Yes. Is it not sharing the screen? There we go, try that. Should be working there. There we go. Don't know why it wasn't before. I thought I did do that. Yeah, okay. Whenever I click anything, you will see a little display of what I'm actually doing. So you can watch the video back, pause it, figure out what I clicked, and then click back yourself rather than sort of trying to listen to my voice at the same time. We want to zoom in and out. We use the mouse wheel. So I'm wheeling up and I zoom into a view. I wheel down and I zoom out of a view, and I can do exactly the same in any one of these. And what you'll notice is as soon as I hover over a viewport, nothing changes. But when I do something in that viewport, I can zoom in and this little thing turns blue to say that that viewport is selected. So I'm currently working on my front selected viewport. If I zoom out, we'll start to see my people come in. And that gives me a rough understanding of what scale I'm working at. So what that tells me is I brought in my people and the default Rhino scene is super, super, super small. It's about the size of like, I don't know, a pound coin or something. So for architecture, that isn't going to be very, very helpful to us. So we have to zoom out in order to see the whole screen and the whole scene. And then the next thing that people tend to struggle with a little bit is, okay, I've zoomed out, but now I want to actually like align my view with something in that scene. So for example, I've just zoomed out to my right viewport and maybe my people are sort of all the way up here. And at this point, what you can do on the top, front, and right is you can hold down your right mouse button. So right click, hold it down, and then drag. And what that will do is move your camera so that you're lining up your view with what you want to look at. So I can now zoom back in, and these guys are where I want to put them in the viewport. I'm just right clicking, holding, and dragging. Same with the front. Right click, hold and drag. Same with the top, right click, hold and drag. Now the perspective viewport is a little bit different because if I right click, hold and drag, something different happens. In this case, I orbit. So I'm orbiting around the center of my view. An orbit is an incredibly powerful tool, and you'll see that people I'm going to come back to this at a later lecture, but one of the things that you see a lot of the time with people using Rhino or 3ds Max or Revit or whatever is sitting in front of a computer, not actually doing anything, but just doing this. Just rotating. Just orbiting the model, just kind of glancing at it every now and again. And like, it's quite intoxicating. You sort of lose your mind in this 3D world, and that you just think, I must be doing work because I'm clicking. But that doesn't actually really help very much. There we go. You can also get yourself into all sorts of pickles. There we go. Look, I'm upside down now. How did that happen? I'm not really sure. The other thing that you can get really into a pickle about is if you are clicking and dragging. Do you see where my mouse is? I'm clicking and dragging. And if I then accidentally bring my mouse over to another viewport, it will basically swing me back to this way. Oh, Hannah, just leave me alone. I'm just gonna mute this. There we go. But you'll see that basically, like, as you do this kind of weird thing where you kind of like move around, it can jump around in this weird way. And did you find this with your summer task? That a large proportion of your time was basically just spent trying to set your view up so that you could actually see what you were trying to do? Just give me a wave if you sort of resonate with that. Yeah. I'm not alone. This is good. This is like step one of 3D modeling. It's very like playing a musical instrument. You think you see someone else playing like the violin and it's amazing. And you think, wow, well, I'd like to be able to do that. So you pick up a violin and you're all fingers and thumbs. And it's just like everything's really tricky and difficult and you can't even do the basics. Well, welcome to 3D modeling. It doesn't take long, but there is a learning curve to this kind of stuff. And there's a really, really useful tool that is almost the first thing that I tend to teach people in Rhino because it stops you getting into that place where you're just frustrated with the tool and it's not showing you what you want to show. You can even get to a point where you're like lost over here. And like, there's nothing on my viewport now. I'm right clicking, dragging. I can't see anything on my viewport because I've like zoomed out too far, or I've zoomed in too far. And I'm like, well, I've lost my people. I don't know where they are. The other thing I can do in the perspective viewport, if I want to move it like I move my right and left and top, so move like side to side, I can hold down Shift and right click. And I'm doing that and I still can't see anything. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So what you can do is you can do Control A. Control A selects everything. It's a little bit like Microsoft Word. If you just Control A on Microsoft Word or Notepad or anything, you just select all the text or select all the objects. Control A, select all. Oh, and then suddenly I get this little thing pop up. We'll come back to that, what that is. But it tells me that my stuff is kind of over there. But then I'm going to come up and use one of the most useful tools in Rhino, which is, here we go. This one here. And it looks like a frying pan with 2 eggs in it. Why it's a frying pan with 2 eggs in it, I'm not sure. The user interface on Rhino is a little bit old and dated. But what it actually is saying is it's a magnifying glass with 2 yellow blobs in. And the yellow blob means selected. So when you select something, it turns yellow. So what that's saying is it's going to magnify in glass 2 yellow stuff. What it means is I'm going to zoom your view so that all the selected things are in the middle of that view. And it'll basically like reset all of that nonsense that I just did by like wibbling around with my mouse. So I'm going to come over here and do that. I'm going to Control A and then press my magnifying glass. And lo and behold, my perspective view is now back to where it's supposed to be. Not only that, but the center of that selection has now become the center of my orbit. So now everything is kind of nice and neat and back together again. The thing that you'll often see, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of on purpose set the center of my view over here, and then I'm going to zoom in here. the center of your orbit is like almost this invisible point in space. But if it gets offset by different ways in which you're moving around, what you then find is that you try and do the right click and orbit, and this happens. Are you familiar with this kind of feeling? Of like, well, I found the things on my screen, but then as I orbit them, they kind of like disappear off, and then they disappear off that way. And if I'm really careful, I can kind of come back. But you see like the center of this rotation is like nowhere near where the actual people are, and you get really lost. So again, what you can do is Control A, frying pan. The other thing you can do is if you want to sort out all your viewports in one go, Control A and then right click on the frying pan, and it will give you a little pop-up here. One says zoom selected if you left click. The other says zoom selected all viewports. Well, if I right click, it'll sort out all my viewports for me. And you don't even have to do it with a Control A beforehand. You can just select one thing, and now we're zoomed onto that one object. Any questions on that as we're sort of like navigating our way around? Have I just basically answered a whole load of your annoyances over the summer task in one go? There's a question, yes.
Is there any way to set the center of rotation in a specific object?
Yes, absolutely. So the center of that orbit rotation, all you do is you select the object that you want to be at the center of that viewport, and you click that zoom selected button. And in fact, because I use that so much, what I tend to do is rather than click the button, I find it quicker to use a shortcut. So I won't spend huge amounts of time on shortcuts, but I think the shortcut I tend to do is, I haven't actually set it up on this version of Revit. You can set up shortcuts to do whatever you want. Actually, I'll come back to shortcuts after command. But yeah, basically, you can select one thing and then set that to be the center, or zoom selected. And then as you zoom out, that stays in the center of your orbit. That makes sense? Right. And then also where your mouse is when you zoom has an impact. So if I hover my mouse over that 6-foot man, Dennis, and zoom in and out, it's going to zoom in and out on Dennis. But if I hover my mouse over this, it's going to zoom in and out on here. And now that will become the center of my viewport. It's a little bit tricky to work out, but it's kind of like playing an instrument. You have to kind of practice and figure it out as you go, and you'll work out the things that are going to make things quick. But this is worth practice. This is why I'm spending actually quite the first 15 minutes of the lecture just on the user interface, because when this trips you up, it stops you from doing any actual work. This is really worth practicing. Just put aside some time, 15, 20 minutes every day. Just decide to bring in some people, navigate the viewport, set your views up the way you want them to, work out how you're going to set views the way you need them to go, and then practice with the shift and right click and the right click. And then you can also choose other combinations of shift and control and alt. So alt and right click zooms you in really smoothly. Control right click zooms you in and out smoothly. Shift and right click, shift and control and right click on a top view turns it into a 3D one, which is, to be honest, really annoying, because then you've lost your top view. So what you have to do is then come back in and say set view top, and then it will jump back to being a top view. So holding down different combinations of control and shift and alt will give you different results when you right click in a viewport. And you can practice those, and you can figure out which ones. To be honest, the ones that I use all the time are simply just right click and drag, or shift and right click and drag. More than that, you don't really need to worry about right now. And then, of course, the mouse wheel. So here we go. I'm going to center up my viewport. Now, one of the things you'll notice on my version of Revit that won't be in place when you first fire up Revit is that when you click on an object, you get this guy here, which is like some arrows firing off in all sorts of directions, and these kind of arcs. and these kind of little square things, and then sometimes these things arrive, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they appear, and it's all a bit confusing. I'm just going to do this to make things a little bit easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select Gary here, my 5'8" man. I'm going to select him, and I can select him by clicking, but I can also select by dragging. And if I select by dragging, I can drag in two different directions in exactly the same way as AutoCAD. Give me a wave if you remember how you select things in AutoCAD. Yeah. These are my terms. They're not very helpful terms with anyone else. Like that, if you went into practice, you wouldn't find anyone else using these terms. But if you drag and click from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, in my mind, reminds me of that film, The Lion King, the animated one, not the one from a few years ago. Has anyone watched The Lion King? Your parents made you watch it when you were small. And there was this bit in it where Simba is sitting with his dad on Pride Rock, and they're looking out over the jungle or the arid plains or whatever, and he says, "Everything the light touches will be yours." That everything your mouse touches is going to get selected. Stuff that's entirely within the box, stuff that's just touching the box gets selected. Everything the light touches, Simba, the Simba selection. Now, there's another way of selecting things, a little bit like CAD, where you can go from the left to the right. And do you see, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but the box is no longer dashed. It's now solid. If I go right to left, the box has dashes on. If I go left to right, the box is solid. And what this does is it only selects stuff that is entirely enclosed within that box. So if I let go of my mouse now, what's going to get selected? Just the text, absolutely. The Gary, is not entirely in the box. He's got a little bit hanging out. So only the text is going to get selected here. And these are really powerful tools because the number of times you can see people spending a long time just trying to select the thing that they want to actually select. Even worse, you could end up in a situation where, just like in CAD, if you select something by clicking on it and then you hold down Shift and you select something else, it'll add to that selection. So I'm holding down Shift and selecting. And when you've got a very complicated model with 50,000 different parts, you don't want to have to go around the whole thing going Shift, click, 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 and then realize you forgot one and then have to come back and select it again. It's much easier to set up your view so that you can just say, right, I want to select all this text. Well, there's an easy way of doing it, which is use my left to right. There we go. I've got the text. Done. You just have to set the view up and then do that selection, right way or wrong way. To make things easier for a little bit, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and I'm going to type a word. And Rhino is kind of quite conversational. There's a button. You could click a button, just like we clicked the button for the Zoom selected. You can set up shortcuts. I'll show you that in another week. But you can also just type. And it's like having a little conversation with a weird, quite dumb computer. And what I want to do is I want to only see the stuff that I've selected. I want to hide all the other stuff in the view. Because these people are kind of they're a bit too dense and they're just like this black silhouette and they're not very nice. So what I'm going to type is isolate. And you'll see that as I start typing, in the top left-hand corner, it started to give me a whole load of commands that it thinks I might mean. And the first one is isolate. So it has auto-completed for me. In fact, I could just type ISO, and it would say, oh, you probably mean isolate, right? That's a command you want to make. And isolate is a really simple command. Oh, isolate, there we go. It'll hide everything in your viewport other than what you have selected. It'll isolate that thing. And then you think, well, that's great because now I can work on that without any of the distractions. But how do I get it back? Oh no! Well, there's a few different ways. If you've hidden something, what's the opposite of hiding it? Showing it, or unhiding it, I suppose. But show, if you just type show, it will show everything that's hidden. I'll try that one more time, just so you can kind of go along with it. I can type isolate, I can isolate one thing, I can work on that area of my model, for example, not without all the distractions of everything else, just those certain elements. And then when I'm done, I can type show. Or I can type isolate, and then I can type unisolate. It does the same thing. It's quite conversational. If you can think of a term, you can just try typing it and see whether Rhino recognizes it. So I'm jumping ahead here, but let's say I want to make a box next to this person. I want to make a box next to the person. What do? I type box. And then it gives me a little conversation to have with the computer. The first thing is first corner of base. I'm gonna come back to the stuff in the brackets in a second. First corner of base, and my mouse has changed to this little cursor with a target on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my view up. I'm right clicking, and do you see I've still got this mouse with a cursor on, and the command line is still asking me where do I want the first corner of the base of my box to be. I just typed box, that's all I did. But the cool thing about this is why the right click thing works so well, is that the right click allows you to change your view, but the left click will activate the command that you have loaded up. So think about it like this. Rhino, I mean, this is a bad picture, really. I suppose I should find a better picture. But Rhino is like, you've got a gun that you could point at anything. And the first thing you do is you load a bullet into the gun. And then once that bullet's loaded, then you can point it where you need to go, and then you can fire the trigger. So what we've done is we've loaded up the gun with a box command. So we're saying, right, put a box somewhere, please. But then, whilst that's loaded, I can choose where I point my viewport. I can put it in any one of these viewports. I could come up to my top viewport and draw it from above. I could come here to my side viewport and draw it from the side. I could use my perspective viewport. And I can click once with my left mouse button, left click. And then it's going to say, well, where do you want the other corner of your box? Well, okay, let's put it there. I'm just doing this by eye, nothing special. Boom. And then it says, well, how high do you want your box? And I can change the viewport and change my mind about what I'm making. In the middle of me making it, I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can pan, I can do my funny control zoom. And then when I'm happy, I click the final button and it has made a box, and then my command line has gone back to being blank again. So my process of creating this box is kind of like a combination of setting my views up, and then the command talks me through every click that I need to make. Any questions on that before I move on? Because I'm going to show you a lot of these commands today just to kind of get you started. But I may have missed some things or skipped over some stuff that was not obvious to you. Deselect. So if as in like I've selected this thing and then I hold down shift and I've selected this thing and I'm like, oh no, I didn't want that second one. It's control. You hold down control and you click and it deselects that thing. Selection is super powerful in Rhino. You can basically select anything that you want. I'm just gonna do, what shall I do here? I'm gonna make a curve. There we go. In this scene, I've got these people, and what they are is Rhino thinks of them as things. This is a really, really helpful sort of longer answer to your question. When I select it, it tells you what that thing is. So it says I've just selected 34 meshes and one curve. When I select this, it tells me I've selected one open mesh. And a mesh is just like a whole load of triangles you can see here. This mesh is just made up loads of triangles. If I select this thing here, it says one closed extrusion added to selection. So obviously this thing that I made, this box, Rhino thinks of it as an extrusion, whatever that is. And this thing over here that I imported, Rhino thinks of it as a mesh. It's a different thing. This thing, if I click on it, says one open curve. It thinks it's a curve. It knows it's a curve because it's just a line on the ground that I just drew. Now, when you've got lots and lots of things, what you can do is you can do things like cell mesh. I just typed cell mesh. What that's going to do is select all the meshes in my model. So I haven't had to hold down shift or control or do any of those things and like go around and click all the stuff. I've just selected all the meshes. I can deselect by just clicking into a blank space, and I can do cell curve. Now, Rhino knows that your time is precious to you, and you don't have the time to type the words SELCURVE, because selecting curves is something that you might want to do quite a lot. So to help you out, they've made it a little bit more like 90s text speak. You know, like, well, you probably have never had to like text on a Nokia 3310, where people would have a character limit, and they would say, like, instead of see you later, SEEYOULATER, they would say see you later. They'd condense everything. And Rhino does the same thing. So if you want to select a curve, you go cell curve, because your time is precious to you and you don't want to have to type the whole thing. You select curve and it will select the curves in your model. Similarly, cell extrusion. When we clicked on that box, it told us that it was an extrusion. So I can do cell extrusion and it will select the box. But it will select all of them. You can also use combinations in selections where you can hold down shift and click and drag. And then you can hold down control and click and drag. If this actually works. Yeah, there we go. So I've selected this. I want to add, by holding down shift, these two characters here. And then I go, oh no, I didn't want to select the text. So I can hold down control and click and drag and just select the text that I want to remove from the selection. Does that make sense? I'm holding down control. I'm doing a non-Simba selection, and then the text has removed itself from my selection. It's not gone yellow anymore. And what I've ended up with is these two people and this line selected, just by using combinations of the control and the shift, and then the click and drag, or the click once. Does that answer your question? Cool. I think basically selections are the kinds of things that you can do a lot of cool work with. I might come back to some more of that sort of stuff in a little bit, because advanced selection can really speed up your workflow. But right now, all you need to do is know how to select things and how to add things to your selections. We're kind of getting used to now this concept that you can type what you want into Rhino and it will listen to you and tell you what you need to do. So what I want to do is I'm just going to select these guys and hide them. This is exactly the same as me isolating before, but I'm doing it the other way around. So rather than clicking the thing I want to keep and typing isolate, that will hide everything else. I'm going to select the stuff I want to hide and type hide, and then it will disappear. So it's a little bit like you're having a conversation with someone, and you can say the same words or different words, and you mean the same thing, and Rhino will just kind of like go with you, or at least I feel like we're having this nice conversation between friends. I've got this person, I've got this box, I've got this curve that we've made. Creating stuff, and this is effectively what you're doing, is you're creating 3D models of stuff. The best way to learn Rhino is to learn the commands that you're going to ask Rhino to do, rather than learn where the buttons live on the user interface. So, for example, to make a box, I could have come over here to this bar here and found this little icon here that looks like a box. For some reason, the thing is not looking good today. There we go. So I could have found this box, and I could click it, and it will do exactly the same as what I just typed. box. It'll say, where do you want the first corner? I'll put it here. Where do you want the other corner? I'll put it here. How high do you want it? Well, I'll bring my mouse down to the front viewport so I can see how high it's going to be. Maybe I want it to be the same height as this guy's head. So I'll click it there. There we go. I've got this kind of fridge-sized box. I can click the button. That's absolutely fine. But there are lots of things where it's much quicker to just know the commands. So knowing that I can type box, doesn't matter what view I'm in, what buttons are visible, what buttons aren't visible. There's tons and tons of these tabs along the top. Oh, there we go. Tons of these tabs. Oh, is this gonna give me a little hissy fit? Come on. Yeah, there we go. All these tabs change the buttons that are available to you. And the number of buttons is overwhelming. And if you have to look for a button in a tab every single time, you're going to start losing your mind very, very quickly. So instead, it's slower. It feels slower at the start, but learn some commands and limit yourself to just using the commands that you've learned and practicing those. And I'll show you more than you need. And you'll be surprised how often you find yourself never really needing to worry about what's the button hidden 3 tabs deep. It's like I was saying to some of you last week, you can learn 5% of this software and still be an expert. You don't have to know what every single button does. You can also say, well, I want to make a cylinder. I want to make a thing that has a circular cross-section and goes up into the sky. The other thing about these buttons is there are way more stuff than Rhino can do that they can fit on the button panel. So if I wanted to create a cylinder, well, there is no button for cylinder. And there's no button along here for cylinder. I can't find one. I could look till the cows come home. Actually, what it is it's hidden under this cascade. So you go to the box section, you have to know it's under box. Already, you have to know quite a lot there. And then you can find this little arrow, and you can click the arrow, and then it'll give you more shapes that you might want to make. And one of them is a cylinder. So already, it's actually quicker at that point to just know the word cylinder, which you already know in your natural vocabulary anyway, and type CYLI, and then it'll auto-complete it for you. So really, at the end of the day, I don't have to type 3 characters, CYL. Rhino's gone, oh, you mean cylinder, right? I press enter, and now I'm into making a cylinder mode. So I've loaded my gun up with the cylinder bullet, and I can choose to put it where I want. So it's going to say, where do I want the base of the cylinder? I'm going to come into my top viewport. I'm looking down on the ground. I'm going to click once with my left mouse button. Then it's going to ask me to choose a radius, and I can do that in a number of ways. Same as the box, I can basically just pick a point, and the further away my mouse goes, the wider this cylinder is going to be. The other thing I can do, and you notice at the top here, it says radius, and then it's got a little thing that says 35.00. That is the default value if you don't do anything else. So I don't have to click my mouse. I could just press enter on my keyboard. And what that will do is accept the default value, which in this case is 35 millimeters. Now that's 35 millimeters, that's not a very wide cylinder. So maybe what I want to do is type in a specific number that I want. I don't want to have to guess it with my mouse. What I want to do is I want 150 millimeters in radius. And I'm going to press 150 on my keypad. I'm going to press enter. And what you'll notice is that now it's drawn this circle on the ground, and I know that that's exactly a 150 millimeter radius cylinder because I typed in the numbers. Do you see this different way of working? The one way, when I was making the boxes, I literally just randomly clicked anywhere with my mouse, and it made some shapes, and that was nice. But this way enables me to very, very precisely specify how big this thing is going to be. And all I needed to do was to engage with this thing here where I typed in a number. And you'll see, in fact, I can try and make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. Base of cylinder. Oh yeah, here we go. Radius 35. and then it's got a whole load of stuff in brackets, which we'll come back to, and then I typed 150. So there's even a record of what I typed in. And then the end of the cylinder is basically how tall it is off the ground. Now, again, I could use my mouse, and I can come up and down, and I can sort of look at that and go, oh, about this big. But obviously, that's going to set a number which is like 124.79 millimeters or something. What if I want it to be exact? Well, if I want it to be exact, I'll just type an exact number. I want it exactly 1,200 millimeters high. Enter. Boom. And now here we are. In order to make this easier, I'm going to double click on the perspective viewport up here, double click, and it will make it big. So all my other viewports have gone away, and I'm just working my perspective. And as I zoom in here, we can now double check this has come out the way I wanted it to. And I can check it with the distance command. Just type distance, and I'm going to measure the distance between the bottom of my cylinder. And I'm using snaps here, and I'll tell you about snaps in a second. Going again, the distance from the bottom of my cylinder all the way to the top of my cylinder. And lo and behold, look, it's exactly 1,200 millimeters. So this is how you can make things that have an exact real size. You don't use your mouse, you just type the thing that you want into the command. Similarly, if this has a radius of 150 millimeters, what I'd expect is that the distance between this point here and this point here should be 300 millimeters. And it is, because it's two radiuses, one diameter. Okay. How are we doing so far? More questions? Speed-wise, is this about right? Am I going the right kind of speed? Have you got notes that you're taking? You've managed to keep up and you're happy with that? If you've been trying to do this along with me, do you feel like maybe you might be slipping behind a little bit in terms of getting a bit lost at some point in the past? But just because you got a pen, that's all you need. And then we can watch this back this week and you can make these wonderful, lovely shapes that are really fun. Great. Let's make some stuff, because this is what we're here to do, isn't it? What you'll notice is that this bar here kind of moves upwards in complexity from the start to the end. The first thing on the list is basically just a cancel button, which is the same as the escape button, or just a click somewhere on a blank piece of the canvas. And that just cancels whatever job you're in. So you can press escape at any point, and that'll cancel out of any command that you're in. The next thing is a point. So we can make a single point. So if I pick up this single point bullet with my mouse, and I can just boom onto the ground. Now, that was a very, very simple operation, because it didn't ask me anything at all about what that point needed to be, how big it was. It's a point, it's infinitely small, and it just goes wherever you click on the ground. And as you look, it's quite difficult to see here. There's a point there, and there's a point there. And it's just kind of arrived on the ground. And points are fine, but lines are better. The next thing that you can make is a polyline. And for this one, I'm not going to use the button because I'm trying to learn some commands. A polyline is exactly what you learned about in CAD last year, the difference between lines and polylines. Maybe I'll start with a line and then we can demonstrate it. So I can type line and it says, where do you want the start of the line to be? Well, should we go here? Where do you want the end of the line to be? Oh, let's go there. And then it ends. We're done. No more command. And the command thing is empty. My gun is out of bullets. I fired all my bullets. I can point at whatever I want, but I can't do anything here. It's made a line. A polyline is kind of cool because what you can do is you can say, well, I want to start the polyline here. I want the next point to be here. And then the bullets never run out. I can keep clicking and I can draw a polyline that goes all the way around. And in fact, I can even bring it all the way back to the beginning of my thing. And now what I've ended up with is a much more complex line that has lots of kinks in it. With me so far? And the difference between this is this one, rhino nose, it's open. It's an open curve. It's got two ends and they're just dangling in space. This one, I went click, 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 click. I came all the way back to where I was at the beginning, and now I've created a loop. It's a closed loop, and it's a closed curve. So rhino nose, this is a closed curve. Now polylines are all very good, but they are also sort of this, they've got this very firm kind of corners. What if I wanted something a little bit more fluid and less kinky? I could come here and I can bring in a control point curve, and I can actually just type curve. I want a curve, please, not a polyline. And then it's going to say, well, where do you want the start of the curve to be? Let's go start the curve here. Next point. And it's drawn this straight line, completely straight. Next point goes here. But then just like the polyline, I can keep clicking. And my next point, I'm going to zoom into this so you can kind of see. My next point is going to do something much more interesting. And it's going to basically, it's going to keep the direction that it was previously going in from here to here. But as I move away, it's now going to bend that curve around so that it ends at the point that I'm going to click at. And the way to think about this is kind of almost like magnetic, or it's actually based on something called splines, which is both mathematical and is also something that shipbuilders used to use, like a bendy piece of wood that would go between one pin and another, and they kind of bend this small piece of wood and then use it to trace out a really lovely curve so that you could build beautiful ships with lovely curved hulls that go really fast through the water. And then similarly, once I've clicked again, if I then keep clicking, these 2 points that I made, 1 and 2, are kind of, they're trying to pull the curve towards them, but they'll never actually reach it. Whereas my 2 end points are absolutely stuck in space. And this is the nice thing, I can select that curve and it will show me the control points that I clicked in order to use it. And then when those control points are being shown, I can use my selection knowledge to select those control points, and I can change my mind about the curve that I just drew. The first thing I've done is I've drawn a curve with 4 control points. The next thing I can do is select it, and I can use this, my left to right selection. And what that will do is only select that one control point. And because I have my gumball turned on, this is the little thing down here called the gumball. This guy is the one with the arcs and the arrows. I can now grab one of those arrows and push it and pull it, and it will change the curve that results from that control point, pulling it in one particular direction. Is that making sense so far? It's like I can sort of move these magnets around. I can also move the starting point. And I can move this one, maybe so this becomes a much nicer shape that I really wanted. And with curves, and indeed polylines, I can just select this one control point, I can drag it up into the sky. Whoa, suddenly we've got like something 3D here. I can even use this little guy here, which is a planar move. And what that does is it kind of moves it left, right, and up and down, but it doesn't move it side to side. The gumball is super, super helpful because you can basically put something down that's nearly what you want, but you don't have to lose your mind over getting it exactly right. And then you can change where those points go later, especially with curves. So what it allows you to do is be quite free with the way that you model. I'm just going to start sort of putting this curve here. There we go. Maybe it might be fun to start building something that actually does have a little bit of architectural sense to it. Like maybe if I took this point here and I use the gumball to move it up into the sky. And again, this is where we need to get really confident with how our viewports work, because I'm moving my viewport using shift and right click, and I'm dragging things with my my left mouse button at the same time to kind of get a sense of where this might want to go. And I can zoom around here. There we go. Okay, great. This looks like a really nice starting point for something. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to make another curve. And maybe this curve kind of goes, I'm going to do it on the floor. There we go. And I make one more curve with 4 control points. It's going to go there. There we go. Do you see, they've just like landed on the floor. They've just gone wherever I wanted to click. I just loaded up my mouse with my control point curve. I put 4 control points down. I can change my mind about where they go. But I tell you what, let's grab this control point over here, just that one. I'm going to move it up into the sky. Maybe we want to move these 2 as well, or these 3. Move them up into the sky a little bit. Maybe this one goes all the way to the top. I'm just kind of playing around here. I'm just kind of like, I've just drawn these lines. They're just sitting in space. I'm exploring a little bit of maybe around what this could be in terms of architecture. See, already these look a little bit like tent poles, don't they? Have you ever tried to put a tent up? You've got these poles, you fold them all out and then you push them through and then they kind of bend in this rather nice way. Well, wouldn't it be cool if we could like stretch some fabric over these lines? That would be fun, wouldn't it? Well, we absolutely can. So one of the things that you can do with lines is you can move from a line to a surface really, really easily in Rhino. And what you do is you select 2 or more curves, and they could be straight curves, they could be wibbly wobbly NURB spline curves, the ones that I've got here, control point ones, or they could be anything in between, just lines. And I'm going to select this one, and then I'm going to hold down shift and select this one. So I've got 2 lines selected. And then I'm going to type the magic word, which is loft. Not loft as in the loft above your house. Loft as in make a surface between 2 lines. Why it's called loft, I'm not entirely sure. But I use loft all the time. What we've got now is more than just a command. It's a window that pops up saying loft options, and I can choose the options that I want to use for this surface. I'm going to just, for now, completely select the default ones. And in order to see this surface, what I'm going to do is change the viewport mode from wireframe, which just lets me see through everything, and it's all a little bit sad, to maybe ghosted. I use ghosted a lot because you can see through things just a little bit, but you can also see the structure that they have. So what we've done here is I've lofted between here and here, and then I can also loft between this line, this curve. Oh, do you see something's happened here? I selected this point here. I clicked, and it said, oh, hang on, there's 2 things right in very close proximity, right next to your mouse. One of them is a surface that you've just made using a loft tool, and the other of which is a curve. Which one do you want? So Rhino's helping you out. Oh, there's 2 things there. Which one do you want? Well, I want the curve, please. Thank you. And then I'm going to hold down shift. I'm going to select this curve, and I'm going to type loft again. And what loft will do is create this kind of stretched fabric between these 2 curves. Are we making architecture? Sort of. Yeah. I mean, what is architecture at the end of the day if it isn't grabbing this guy, chucking him in his little house and saying, oh, that's nice, isn't it? There we go. He's got his little room to live in. He's like walking through a pavilion maybe, something like that. Now, what were the commands I used to make that? I used a control point curve. I just typed curve. I selected the curve, so we've learned how to select. And then we used the loft tool to create surfaces. And these, it's important to understand, these are surfaces. They're infinitely thin, like sheets of paper, just thin surfaces that stretch between 2 curves. I could make loft curves much more angular. This is a polyline, not a curve. I can just grab that one and then select those two and type loft. And then instead of it being a flowy surface, I've now got something that looks a lot more kind of triangular, just by using a polyline rather than a control point curve. But I've done the same thing. I've moved from a line to a surface, and now I can start to actually model surfaces in 3 dimensions that go up and down and left and right, and that, because I've put a person in, have a sense of scale and inhabitation. Just by putting a person next to it, I now can say what this space might actually feel like. I'm going to take a very short pause there, give you a chance for some questions, and then we'll take a few minutes of a break. Any questions on what I've just done? Did I go too fast on it?
Is it possible to extrude
Absolutely. So after the break, we're going to go from curve to surface to what Rhino calls polysurface. There's another dimension out there, which basically then ends up making this surface, rather than paper thin, because architecture is never made of infinitely thin paper, we're then going to make that have a thickness. Yes, we'll come back to that. But that's exactly the right question. Well done. You've read my notes. Other questions? Yeah, one more at the back. Oh, sorry, there were 2 people with their hands up. I'm sorry. With the headphones. Yeah. Yeah. What do we know about Rhino so far? If you want to do something, you just type it in. So let's type grid. And it says choose grid property. Spacing, blah, 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 major line interval, grid line count 70. So the first thing is I'm going to say the minor line spacing, and this is kind of a little bit more advanced because we're using the stuff in the brackets in the command, but it's really helpful. The minor line spacing equals 1. I can click that and say the minor line spacing is now actually 20. And now suddenly the spaces between all of those grid lines has become bigger. So the whole thing has become bigger. Then the other thing I can do is say, oh, where's my mouse gone? Major line interval 5. Well, actually, no, let's make the major line interval 10. And then the grid is a little bit more sparse. And then I can say the grid line count 70. Well, let's make it 200. And then it makes it bigger. So that's the easy way. There's also, if you want to do more mouse clickies, you can do file properties. And you can change all sorts of stuff about your file in file properties, including there's a nice interface for changing the grid. Once you've set up a file the way you like it to be, like there you go, it's grid there, and you can change all these numbers without having to type into the command line. Once you set this up, I would recommend you save a template file with the grid the size you want it to be, with the people in it, and then it's like a starting point for everything you ever want to do. There was one other question. Yes. Boom. I don't even need to explain this very easily. Select all 3 curves, type loft. Whoa, look at that. Nice, eh? And we're like, you've already got a job at Zaha Hadid now. This is all Zaha does. Let's look at there you go. You can do that. That's all it is. It's just curves and lofts. I don't need to teach the rest of this course, really. Basically, you've got everything you need to know. Is that the answer to your question? Yeah. So it's how you select the curves is something you can start playing with over the next little while. But if you select 2, it'll give you this very straight loft. Mathematically, there's some really interesting things going on there. If you select more curves, it will give you basically something that approximates between all of them. You have to be careful, though. and I'll say more about this after the break. You have to be careful. If you go overboard, it's very easy to just create far too much geometry in your scene. So we'll think a little bit about that when we come back. Any other tiny questions, or are we ready to have a break? Okay, let's get some coffee. We'll come back here at 10:15 on the dot.